There are now over 100 cities in the US that have smart city initiatives ongoing, and they touch all kinds of different topics, all kinds of different technologies. Today, we've got with us Dr. Ted Smith, one of the original innovators, the Chief Innovation Officer of Louisville, Kentucky, one of the early innovators in smart cities, to talk about if you are a smart city, where do you start? You guys did a lot of thinking about this, Ted, when you were there. You're now, of course, no longer there. You're the CEO of Revon Systems. But you did a lot of thinking about this as in your role in Louisville. How did you decide where to start?
Yeah, sure. So thank you so much. You know, I think people overcomplicate this. They want to make it a technology conversation, and certainly technologies are a part of the story. But at the end of the day, you know, I served the mayor, and the mayor had a vision for the city, things he wanted to improve, things that he wanted to fix. And really, it's the city priorities that honestly drive the best work in smart cities. And so in our case, you know, we had to focus, it's sort of think of it as a stack. So if you wanted to impact public safety or public health, which were priorities for us, we really needed to get to have a fundamental fabric. You know, like you can't have any of this stuff without connectivity on the digital layer. And so, you know, our focus was really very much early on the broadband infrastructure in our community. If we don't have citizens that are connected, there's really not much more that we're going to be able to get done. You know, there's no point in having a smart city island and then having a whole bunch of people that can't benefit from those services and from those technologies. So our focus was at the base layer first. Many cities across the country are in that situation where they really have digital divides, where they have asymmetries in bandwidth, where they don't really have a handle on the competitive landscape for what many of us argue feels like a necessary public utility. Access to the internet is a necessary part of living in this country. And so that was really where we started, and then you build your way up to those mayor priorities. He didn't run for office saying, let's fix broadband, but once he realized that you couldn't do much about safety and health without broadband, it becomes a priority.
So once you decide that, where do you start? Because there's a lot of ways that manifests itself. Does the city build its own Wi-Fi network? Do you bring in the the wireless carriers? Do you partner with somebody, you know, that's going to lay fiber throughout your whole city? Once you decided that was your priority, where did you go from there in terms of, okay, how do we fix this?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, we've all looked at cities like Chattanooga, you know, as lure, right? I mean, if you could say, this is like water or electricity, then it's like a public utility, then the public sector should somehow lead this. It doesn't take long to realize in Chattanooga's experience, it wouldn't have happened but for their electric utility, right? Without their electric utility, there was no broadband. And from our perspective, we weren't in a position to just piggyback off of a public utility. And so we took the tack that let's see what the private marketplace is willing to offer if we essentially sweeten the pot. And by sweeten the pot, I don't mean pay them off. I mean, get out of the way, right?
Yeah.
Like help them, you know, on the regulatory side.
Grease the wheels.
Exactly. Open for business, right? And so that was our approach. So we put an RFI out looking to any vendor in the country who would be interested in just providing internet, you know, which with over-the-top services and all that's gone on with telephony, you know, it's not your grandfather's cable franchise anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very different landscape. As you pointed out, wireless carriers are an important part of the mix. So, you know, we just said, let's throw it open. We'll make whatever public assets we have available to you. Come on in and compete. And, you know, quite honestly, fast forward, you know, we ended up with Google Fiber coming in, with some smaller operators coming in around the edges of the city, lowering prices, raising service levels. Mostly a success story. We've done our own things in the public side with a fiber build in partnership with the state that supplements or augments how that works. So I think there's a lot of creative options that cities have. It starts with acknowledging the problem and then working on, you know, can you do this privately? Do you need a public-private partnership? Or do you have the ability to do this publicly as a utility?
So you had AT&T Fiber, Google Fiber, the state, you mentioned there was some state-owned public, you know, utility helping to fill in some of the gaps, and then some smaller providers also providing some connectivity as well. But one of the keys was getting Google Fiber here. You guys made it a priority. How did you court Google Fiber? At the time, everyone was courting them.
Sure.
You know, how did you guys convince them this was a city to come and make, you know, one of their stands?
Sure. I don't know that there's any one thing. I mean, I've searched my own soul for the one thing, and there's not one thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's a journey with companies like Google. Google, as a company, had no presence in our market. And so to essentially say, get to know Louisville was definitely a tag team effort. So Mayor Fisher gets a lot of the credit for, you know, at every U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting, he'd go out of his way to make sure that everybody knew who Louisville was. And that, you cannot underestimate, just it's an intentional activity. It's a participation sport. It's not send in your proposal and see if they pick your city.
Yeah.
It's definitely not that. It's a socialization thing. You need that company to feel comfortable about a city that they don't really know anything about. You know, that was sort of the early sort of engagement. And then the second layer of engagement was really when we said we would work to remove regulatory burden or things that you don't understand about how to do business in our city. That's great as rhetoric, but what it turned into in reality was changes in our legislative process.
Yeah.
You know, we're the first city in the country to pass One Touch Make Ready, which is access to those poles for pole attachment. Critically important issue for companies like Google Fiber. They need to know that they can come in and deploy, and if they can't, they won't come in. And so in the weeds of it, you have we're willing to roll up our sleeves and do this work. Not just for them, I mean, it's for everybody's benefit to have regulations like that lifted.
Great. All right, Ted, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, for more on smart cities, subscribe to TechRepublic's Smart Cities newsletter. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.